there's an aspect of love that I'd really like to discuss with you. I'm picking it up from your book, the Unconditional Love Is, Appreciating Aspects of Life. And I think this is a great one to add to the series, because it's a quality that I have a really great feeling about, and it's grace. And there's something about the sound of grace that it just has a really beautiful quality to it. And so I'm really interested to hear what you're going to say about this. I mean, grace seems to imply graciousness, which has a very beautiful quality to it. I don't know whether gracefulness is something that you're going to include in this. But and actually, if I could just digress slightly on this, sometimes it's said that unconditional love doesn't have the kind of the feeling quality to it that you might expect of, for example, romantic love or other forms of love. And this is something that we haven't really discussed a great deal. But I mean, unconditional love is not something that you experience exclusively with one person in a one-to-one relationship, is it? It's something that's inclusive of everyone and everything. And it tends to have some degree of almost like an absolute quality to it. But for me, the nearer you go to that more absolute quality, the more blissful it's likely to be. I mean, maybe, I don't know whether you would agree that unconditional love, in a sense, has a quality of blissfulness to it, that sense of a very deep fulfillment, a deep inclusiveness, deep completion. And so, in a sense, I suppose I'm looking for that quality of blissfulness from these qualities that we're discussing. And grace, to me, seems to have that. There's a real feeling of beautiful, beautiful feeling, and you have blissfulness, and what is it? It's like the kindness and compassion, and of course those are qualities that you include in your book, and they have these beautiful qualities to them. So I wonder if you could perhaps say something as we get into this discussion about the feeling nature of some of these qualities. But if I could start by just reading the 3 short paragraphs that you write about grace here, and let's pick up on the various points that you're making. To come from a state of grace is the embodiment of unconditional love. This exquisite energy transforms even the hardest experiences, melting away the discord and revealing the love within. Each time we choose to stand in the light of grace, we empower our reality with this fantastic quality. Graceful and serene, we can walk amongst the chaos of destructive appearances and remain untouched. In turn, we act as a beacon of comfort to those around us. This calm state knows the power of love that ever dwells within. I mean, this is sounding very much like I was hoping it would sound. Unconditional love is grace, beautiful beyond measure. The experience of grace is an astounding quality of love. Now that's beautiful. So let's explore this. You give me more.
Well, actually,
so it's almost time. I should play some music in the. How about what have I got? What have I got? Let's just. No, I'll let you off that, Harold.
Okay. You're feeling the energy. Well, you've actually.
I am. This is a beautiful quality.
You have actually very eloquently laid it out already. Grace in the context of all these aspects and qualities that we've been talking about, grace is perhaps something that we tend to experience more fleeting at first when we explore unconditional love for ourselves and the world around us, because it is not something that we're accustomed to embodying. As we move and progress through and deepen our understanding of unconditional love, one could almost say that grace identifies the quality that is most synonymous with the understanding of unconditional love. In other words, as we love more and more unconditionally ourselves and those around us, there is a grace, a dignity, a softness, a sweetness, one can say a bliss. All of these things really represent the experience of grace. And if we actually kind of look at it from the more practical understanding, is how does this happen? It really happens because as we move into more and more of an unlimited state of understanding, in other words, we place fewer and fewer constrictions, we hold less belief systems around our thoughts, feelings, our experiences, the people, places, and things around us, we are freer to experience things just for what and who and how they are. This is how unconditional love becomes such a beautiful part of our understanding, and how grace really is quite a synonymous word for that expression of unconditional love. And grace is really more of the expression. It's where we get to as we embody more and more unconditional love. And as you've rightly also noted, one of the reasons we don't experience grace in our lives is because heretofore most of us on this precious planet have been seeking love outside of ourselves. We are looking for something to complete us. We're looking for people, experiences, relationships, romance, activities, we can say our careers, the whole range of expression we have on this physical planet. So much of it is derived from an outside-in approach. We look to the outside to feel something on the inside. And what we've been talking about in this whole series of the aspects, the qualities of love, is that it's all already inside of us. So grace is already inside of us. And yet, just like unconditional love as an idea that we are striving to understand, grace is something that is equally layered by so many different types of thoughts, feelings, attachments, emotional assumptions. We have so many misinformed, misaligned, misunderstood ways of looking at life because we have been outer focused. We've been thinking that a certain person can bring us a state of bliss or a state of knowing of love, when in fact, when rightly and more significantly looked at, they're often just fleeting experiences. They're momentary experiences. What we think is love is certainly, whenever we're in love in any way, shape, or form, we are experiencing a level of love. It becomes very short in its duration when we have lots of attachments. Like, in other words, we often say, and this is one of the biggest traps with just the singular word of love, we say we love someone. And oftentimes back of that is really, the intention is we want them to love us. We're looking for validation, we're looking for acceptance. We want to be somehow feel something that we're worthy. And so we get into these, relationships where we're experiencing something. Of course, we are, the exchange between two people is always beautiful, even when it's not always beautiful. There's still an element of love that's going on. So we are experiencing something, but it is usually a very minimal aspect of love. And in those minimal aspects, we may feel something that we feel is rather deep, but it might actually be more emotional because we're actually, again, validating something within us that we feel lack of self-worth or lack of self-esteem, something like that. And our whole approach, what we're talking about with these qualities of love, is to take all that understanding inward and begin to explore unconditional love both for ourselves, and then as we understand that more, give unconditional love for the people, places, and things around us. When we are more at peace with ourselves, peace again, as we've said before, a very dynamic energy. It's not something that's absolutely neutral and static. Peace, when rightly experienced, is extraordinarily dynamic. To be at peace is to, again, be another aspect that touches that bliss, that touches that grace. Grace is, again, similar to peace, because in grace we do experience tremendous peace. And yet there's a dignity, a wisdom, an inclusiveness, a oneness, an understanding that we are aligned with all of our aspects. And in that sense of self-knowing, self-awareness, self-realization, we can then walk about our journey in a state of grace. And, in very rare occasions, I think we've all come across, individuals at times in our lives where amongst great chaos, there was a person who was truly in a state of grace. They were at peace with everything that was going on around them, and they were very noticeable by the lack of their strong emotional response or strong intellectual response. They were literally just being graceful. And these images do stand out in our minds because we do realize that there's something going on there that is very intriguing, very palpable. It's something that we know on a deep level because it is who we are on a deep level. The more we get rid of all these illusionary trappings of trying to be the best person for everybody else, or trying to do everything right, or trying to create some false image of the perfect relationship, perfect career, perfect life, perfect family. We strive and strive and strive. Actuality, we struggle. In grace, you don't struggle. In grace, you're at peace with self, at peace with the world around, and we are in a greater and greater state of unconditional love. And peace, bliss, grace, these are all qualities that we could, in a way, we're singling them out in this series so that we can understand them. And yet, they really are facets of the same wholeness. And it's experiential. So, you and I can talk about grace all day long. If a person doesn't actually experience it, they're not going to have that understanding. I think this particular concept, the quality of grace, really resonates with you because you do understand it, and you understand how amazing it is in its simplicity, in its dignity, in its integrity is another word that always comes to mind when I think of grace, dignity, integrity. Honesty, these are all because we're being true, we're being real, we're being self, we're being connected, we're recognizing ourselves in relationship to everything around us, and we're accepting ourselves in relationship to everything around us. That creates this experience that is, again, intrinsically in us of a sense of grace.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, grace is something that we can find within ourselves. And what is it that would develop that sense of grace within? Is that the result of taking a particular approach? Is that the what you get when you love yourself unconditionally? Where does the sense come?
In all of these, and as I started out saying, that grace is something we will experience more fully the more we align ourselves with the awareness of unconditional love. And as we've talked previously, one of the qualities we mentioned was forgiveness. And I said in that particular quality, forgiveness is often a beginning point for unconditional love, because we do have all these misguided views on the world. We have all these perspectives that are filled with suggestions, ideas, teachings, belief systems, emotional experiences, attachments. We all these things that we've been discussing in the series, they're all related to the sense of non-grace, non-unconditional love. In other words, so long as we have all these expressions going on, we tend not to focus at all on our inner selves and on our inner qualities, these graceful qualities, these loving qualities, these blissful qualities. So in a case, and again, this is trying to explain something in a somewhat linear fashion that is really just a universal circular process. So not to dwell so much on there's no perfect right step. Certainly a person can experience a state of grace in a tremendously tragic moment, something that comes over them, in a moment where they see perhaps that their world has been so rocked by an event or something that has happened so immediately that the only response, because it is so large, is to feel a state of grace with it. A little crack, a little opening. So, outside of this linear sense, grace is something that is in us, so it's something we just allow to express as we love unconditionally. We will experience more of it in a way as we love more unconditionally, whereas when I was speaking forgiveness, I kind of look at that as like a beginning point to help us begin to love more unconditionally. I think it would be a bit more difficult for someone to say, go from all these illusionary trappings, all these beliefs and associations to this outside world, the resentments, the rejections, the validations, all the things that we do to try to make sense of our world. I think it would be perhaps a little more challenging to immediately go into a state of grace and then stay in that state of grace and let that grace evolve naturally. I think it's perhaps, by my experience, and maybe that's why I'm speaking of it this way, grace is something that expanded experientially over my life as a kind of as a response of letting go of all the layers, letting go of all these things that have been holding me back. The sense of grace, and in that, one could even, kind of say, what does grace feel like? Well, it's a state of bliss. What is bliss? Well, bliss and grace aren't something you're going to actually be able to describe effectively, because they're experiences that you just have. And you kind of mentioned this notion of, unconditional love is kind of an absolute. It's kind of another word, and this isn't necessarily, from our human standpoint, not necessarily the best description, but it's kind of neutral. I always look at unconditional love as something that isn't sitting between the two extremes of good and bad, dark and light, those types of extremes that we tend to think of. Unconditional love is inclusive, so therefore it includes the polarity, the duality, it includes the good and bad, and sits above it and around it and in it. And so what happens in this sense of the more we love unconditionally in a world that is used to working from an outside-in approach, and we're coming from an inside-out approach, those that are used to highly emotional responses or looking for something that makes them feel alive in their vibration of non-love, they could, one of the phrases I often say, can appear to them that our absolute love, our unconditional love, our neutral love, odd descriptions, because again, unconditional love defies description, but using those to have to understand, it can appear to others that we are actually almost cold or aloof or elusive. We're not really in touch. And yet, couldn't be further from the truth. The more we are in a state of grace, the more we are in an innate sense of peace and bliss, the more we love everything for what it is, the more we love everything for what it is in such a deep way that we let it be what it is. And, humanly, and we all come from this and we all experience this, we tend not to do that. We tend not to be so absolute, other than our blame, our shame, our guilt. We're very absolute with all these negative qualities. We haven't really explored the absolute and the positive, or in the inclusive qualities, the oneness, the love, the peace. And since a person who has grace will recognize grace in another person. Well, we all have it, but we don't always recognize it. Someone who is wanting an emotional reaction, wanting to kind of take that energy, wanting to be validated, they may not recognize grace as readily, even though it's right there next to them. And that's why all these qualities of love begin within. And of course, as we cultivate it within, we begin to recognize it within others. And then we also have ability to, at that time, to help cultivate by modeling, by showing that, love isn't all these crazy things that we have been taught and assumed externally. It's really quite potent, quite powerful, and sits quiescent right there inside of us. Grace is something that is a part of that expression if we want to try to kind of look at it from a particular angle. That's really all we're doing here, is we're saying, okay, let's look at this quality of love to help expand it, experience it by understanding it from this facet of grace. And why in this book series, these individual qualities are great contemplations, because if we say take peace for, as a notion for a day or a week or an hour, we will expand peace in our life because we will begin to understand it. Same with grace. These are qualities that are part of something that's already inclusive with unconditional love, and yet to help us understand it in a world that has been really quite geared to non-love, these qualities help us understand it and cultivate and expand it, and and at the same time they're all just something that happens as part of unconditional love.
The idea that unconditional love is a neutral thing, and I think perhaps you're talking about a state of balance between the polarities, that point of balance. Is that a fair?
It's a point of balance, and though, because we're looking at things really, that would be a linear, and a linear approximation. But even if we kind of put it on a scale and we said, okay, the polarity of one side to the other, love wouldn't sit in the smack middle. It would be in the entire scale. Love is going to be in the dualities. It's going to be in the polarities, and it's not going to even be a part of the duality and polarity. And this kind of gets into that realm where people are going to have to kind of understand this for themselves. It too is part of the understanding of unconditional love. I mean, I certainly didn't get it either. At first, it's like, we're so accustomed to light and dark, good and bad, evil and love, fear and love, all these different kinds of contrast, that we haven't necessarily been encouraged or educated or afforded opportunities to understand what unconditional love really embodies. And unconditional love, as we understand for ourselves, we're going to accept everything unconditionally for ourselves. That means we have to accept the good and the bad. We're going to have to, understand that love is a part of both of these, because the contrasts help us understand love itself. Without the contrast, we wouldn't necessarily understand it in quite the same way. So it's, I even hesitate because the next thought is circular or spherical. But really, it's trying to encapsulate unconditional love when it's in all things kind of defies our mental logic. So we try to put reference to it, and so to say that it is a balancing point is partially correct. Say that it sits above is partially correct, because it doesn't, perhaps it doesn't particularly take sides. It's not saying one thing is good and one thing is bad, or it's the other is bad, and yet it also includes those two polarities. So now we kind of have a spherical energy about it, and yet we can also say it doesn't have anything to do with the polarity at the same time, because it's not attached to them like we are as humans. So therefore, it goes beyond that. Now we're going into multidimensional things, and our brains tend to get a little wacky when we go multidimensionally, because we're used to very linear expressions. So yes, I mean I hesitate even the neutral, because we have such connotation on neutral as being nothing, and yet obviously in this sense, unconditional love is extraordinary. If we can talk about bliss and grace and peace and oneness and these states of grace, then there must be something that we're experiencing. Well, those things are very different than our emotional-based response that are dealing usually in contrast in love and not love. So, it's something that we experience more of as we embrace more of the idea of unconditional love, and we understand it more as we go along.
So the state of grace that one experiences within, that's the state of being, isn't it? And that has in a sense a blissful quality to it. But when one expresses grace to others, then one's expressing grace as kindness, compassion, mercy.
Well, even the word, I mean, what you read out, the graceful. We know when somebody walks gracefully. There's no hurried sense about them. There's a relaxed, peaceful countenance. going on. And, again, we don't have lots of images of that, and yet we do have enough understanding that we understand what graceful, basically appears like. And in that sense, if we are at peace with ourselves, we're in touch with who we are. We understand this love within ourselves. We are an expression of this love within ourselves. It comes to make absolute reason and practical sense that we would walk gracefully. We would walk with grace and dignity, because we would so honor ourselves, and we would so honor everyone and everything around us, that we would just simply be graceful about life. There would be such dignity. I mean, all these words give glimpses to the actual experience, and yet the word itself is not a valid description. It comes to mind, I mean, one of the places we can quickly identify grace is when we're out in nature. Nature is an extraordinarily beautiful expression of grace, in its natural state. I mean, the birds, the trees, the mountains, the air, there's just such grace about that. Well, we can also go up and look in the heavens, and we understand how the planets and the solar systems and everything rotates, and there's such a grace. It's not chaos. There's such a grace, there's such a beautiful expression going on, that those are places where we see kind of grace and action in the natural cycle of life. In the human side of life, the immediate one that comes to mind is looking into the eyes of a newborn child. That newborn child, there's such grace in that child. I mean, it's no wonder we all come flocking to the little babies of the world, because there's such grace in that bundle of package, because there hasn't been all the trials and tribulations and all the suggestions and all the teachings and all the belief systems and all these things, you kind of in a way forced upon that little innocent child. And so we see great grace in the sleeping baby, and in the baby's eyes. I mean, these are the types of experiences that give us glimpses of grace in our life. They aren't always usually strong enough, though, for us to cultivate it, to experience it, to be it, because we have a tendency, again, outside looking, we tend to look for these experiences, but we don't tend to embody them. And the way we embody them is to truly begin the process of loving and accepting ourselves and those around us, and experiences and mistakes and all the activities that got us, experiences that got us to here. All of these things, when we walk in grace, we experience and create and expand and become more grace as ourselves. And then in that process, we touch other people's lives by showing them that it is possible to embody grace.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you, Harold.
Go in grace.
Yeah, you too.